The Invisible Daughter in Charlotte. My name is Jessica Miller, and if there's one thing I remember most about growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's this. I was always invisible, especially at home. Our family lived in a modest, tree-lined neighborhood on the south side of the city. We had a backyard big enough for cookouts, a creaky porch swing, and a sense of order my mother, Linda, worked hard to maintain. As a child, I rarely caused trouble. I learned quickly that the less noise I made, the fewer sighs would come from my parents at the dinner table. I was the second daughter, the other one. Emily, 4 years older, bold, blonde, and bursting with laughter, was a force of nature. When we were kids, she was the girl everyone wanted as a best friend, the first to get a solo in school choir, the star forward on her soccer team, the one who knew how to win our parents' approval, like it was a game she invented. I, on the other hand, was quiet, more attuned to computer screens and library books than to pep rallies or prom dresses. I loved my sister, genuinely, but I felt like a shadow fading in her light. It wasn't that I resented Emily. She had a magnetism that even I admired. But at every family dinner, it was as if the world revolved around her stories. My mother, a radiant Southern woman with a sharp tongue when she needed it, practically glowed with pride each time Emily's name came up. My dad, Paul, a stoic construction engineer, would lean forward, asking Emily about her latest achievement. Even extended family from as far away as Asheville would greet her by name and forget to ask about me. I did well in school, quietly earning top grades. Though, if you asked my parents, I doubt they could have named a single subject I loved. Once, after I received first place in the state math Olympiad, I left the certificate on the kitchen table, hoping someone would ask me about it. No one did. Later, when Emily brought home a most creative trophy from drama club, my mom posted it on Facebook with a caption that used the word proud 5 times. The pattern continued as we grew up. Emily's high school graduation was a grand affair. Family flying in, a big party in our backyard. When I graduated 3 years later, my celebration was a dinner at Applebee's. Just the 4 of us. My mom obsessively checking her phone for Emily's texts from college. Somewhere along the way, I learned to blend in, to hide my accomplishments rather than risk being told, "That's nice, honey," before the topic pivoted back to Emily. I developed a sense of humor, sometimes self-deprecating, sometimes sharp. It was easier to crack a joke about nerds eating lunch alone than admit how painful it felt to live in the blind spot of my own family. In high school, I spent weekends at the local library, joining coding clubs and diving into whatever computer languages I could teach myself. It was there, between rows of sunlit paperbacks, that I first felt seen. My advisor, Mrs. Green, once pointed out, "Jessica, you don't have to be loud to be important." Her affirmation stuck with me. Though I never heard anything like it from home, Charlotte can be a lively city. But for me, it was often a place filled with conversations I wasn't part of. Family gatherings were the hardest. Emily would sweep in, late but sparkling, hugs all around. Neighbors would ask her about college life and boyfriends. And if I spoke, I felt like a commercial break, something to be endured until the main show returned. Looking back, I think what hurt most wasn't being overlooked. It was the hope that maybe, someday, if I did everything right, straight A's, good manners, made myself useful, they'd see me, really see me. But the years wore on, and the gap grew wider. By the time I reached my 20s, I'd perfected the art of existing quietly in a family that never quite noticed I was there at all. It took me decades to realize this feeling, this invisibility, shaped everything. The person I became, the choices I made, the way I measured my worth. Charlotte wasn't just a city. It was the backdrop of a life spent reaching for a kind of love and recognition that always seemed just out of reach. And that longing, for better or worse, was the silent engine driving every chapter that followed. The exhausting years for my family. The shift in our family didn't happen overnight, but I remember the day it started, the summer I turned 16. Up until then, life in Charlotte was predictable, if unremarkable. My dad, Paul, made a steady living as a construction engineer, leaving early each morning in his steel-toed boots and coming home with the smell of concrete and sawdust still clinging to him. My mom, Linda, stayed busy keeping our home immaculate, meal planning down to the last carrot stick in my lunchbox, and making sure Emily never missed a rehearsal or practice. But then, suddenly, the security of our routine evaporated. Charlotte's construction industry hit a slump that year, and my dad, after 2 decades with the same firm, was handed a severance envelope and told to clear out his office. That night, the house felt colder, as if the foundation itself had cracked beneath us. Mom spent hours in the kitchen, avoiding our eyes, and Emily threw herself across her bed, furious that her allowance would shrink and her shopping trips might be on hold. For me, the anxiety of losing that financial safety net set in quickly. Within a month, unpaid bills began to pile up on the hall table, each envelope a silent accusation. Our evenings shifted from laughter and television reruns to tense discussions about what we could go without. The first real loss was the Wi-Fi. I remember Dad apologizing as he broke the news over canned soup one evening, and Emily's tears, loud and dramatic. Not for the family, but for her Netflix binges and online shopping carts left to expire. I made a quiet vow that night. I would never let myself or my family be at the mercy of chance and layoffs. I took on after-school tutoring and spent weekends babysitting for neighbors. My own little nest egg became the secret I hid in the bottom drawer of my desk. An insurance policy I hoped we'd never need, but need it, we did. When the power was cut one muggy July afternoon, I used my savings to pay the electric bill, handing my mom the cash without a word. She stared at it for a long moment, pride and gratitude warring in her eyes, before finally pulling me into a brief, silent hug. Emily, meanwhile, became more restless and more entitled. She complained constantly about hand-me-downs and the fact that prom dresses now had to be borrowed, not bought new. One day, the family car broke down on the way to the grocery store, stranding my mom at a strip mall. Emily called me the responsible one and Miss Independent whenever I managed to scrape together enough money to help with emergencies. But her tone always dripped with resentment, as if my small contributions were a reminder of what she'd lost. Then, Mom's health started to falter. Nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue, headaches, tension that never seemed to fade. Our family doctor recommended tests, but we hesitated, worried about the cost and the insurance we couldn't quite afford. When the time came, it was my newly earned wages from tutoring and a part-time library job that covered her visit, the prescriptions, the checkups. I watched the balance in my savings dwindle, but I never second-guessed my decisions.
This is it.
Over the years,
The
the routine of giving became relentless. By the time I was in college, earning a computer science degree, every holiday or school break was shadowed by new crises at home. If a utility bill was overdue, my phone would buzz with a request, sometimes gently worded, sometimes almost expected, and I always found a way to help. Emily, now in college herself, never hesitated to call when her rent was due. or her credit card was maxed out from impulse shopping. "It's just this once," she'd tell me, often with a laugh that let me know she barely believed it herself. No matter how much I gave, whether the money came from my campus job or later, my first paycheck as a software engineer, it never felt like enough. Over 8 years, I must have funneled thousands into the family account. Holidays were quieter, lighter on gifts, but heavier with unspoken tension. The few moments that should have been about joy, my graduation, a new job, even buying my first car, were overshadowed by the next family need and my own sense of obligation. What hurt most wasn't the money, but how invisible my efforts remained. Emily called me Miss Hotshot when I shared news of a work promotion, her eyes glinting with a mixture of sarcasm and envy. Mom would occasionally say, "Don't work so hard, Jessica. You're not getting any younger," the words falling flat, never accompanied by thanks. Dad, always quiet, simply accepted the help as if it was the most natural thing in the world. In those years, exhaustion became my constant companion. There were nights I'd lie awake, mentally calculating which needs at home I could cover, which I had to delay, and wondering if things would ever get better. And through it all, Charlotte grew and changed beyond our windows. New buildings rising downtown, tech companies moving in, people talking about opportunity and hope. Yet inside our modest house, I felt the invisible weight that came from trying to hold everything and everyone together, still wishing someone would finally see not just the things I paid for, but the person I was. One fateful anniversary night, the Miller house always looked its best in summer, but never more so than on the night of my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. For weeks, I'd thrown myself into every little detail, desperate to make the occasion unforgettable. Not just for Linda and Paul, my mom and dad, but for myself too. Maybe, I thought, this would finally be the night I stopped feeling like an afterthought and started being seen as a real part of the family. It had taken months of quiet planning. I'd spent rainy weekends browsing Pinterest for centerpiece ideas, Tuesday nights comparing catering menus, my lunch breaks on the phone with rental companies about tables and chairs. I didn't delegate a thing. Deep down, I knew if I didn't handle it, no one would. Emily contributed nothing, of course, but I even offered, out of some leftover hope, to put her name on the gift card, just so everyone could say it was from the girls. I bought new string lights to wind through the dogwoods overhead, rented table linens in pale blue, my mother's favorite color, and sprung for a vintage-style sound system to play their wedding song, Under the Stars. The catering bill alone almost made me choke, $2,000. But nothing felt too much for a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. The gift was my biggest splurge of all, a $3,000 wicker patio set, sofa, chairs, matching table, delivered that morning, still smelling faintly of sawdust and polish. I imagine my folks drinking coffee there every sunrise for years to come, and a small, secret wish flickered. Each time they sat, maybe they'd remember who made it possible. On the actual day, I arrived hours early, balancing trays of canapes and nervously fluffing the floral arrangements I'd stayed up making. The Charlotte summer air was thick and fragrant, humming with cicadas. My dress, a soft yellow sundress, stuck to my skin as I moved folding napkins, lighting candles, instructing the caterers where to set up. It was my first time orchestrating anything this big, but no one offered help, not even as guests started arriving, voices mixing with the smell of fried chicken and fresh-cut grass. By 6, the backyard glowed, fairy lights twinkled on high. The catering table was set with cornbread, collard greens, and peach cobbler. The new patio furniture, covered in a gauzy cloth, sat in the center, like a secret, waiting to be revealed. My mom buzzed around greeting friends from church. My dad beamed, shaking hands with every arrival. His small company had been picking up at last, and he looked almost proud again. Emily breezed in, fashionably late, a whirl of perfume, red lipstick, and careless laughter. She wore a stunning blue dress that matched the linens, as if she'd known the theme. But of course, she hadn't. Guests flocked to her, drawn by her easy charisma. I resented it, but managed a polite hello, forcing myself to believe her presence, at least, mattered. As the evening settled into lively chatter, I floated, half host, half ghost, checking on the drinks, making rounds with extra forks, straightening chairs after people had left them askew. When the sun melted away, the lanterns I'd hung sprang to life. Everyone gathered at long, family-style tables. Sitting across from my mother, I watched her holding my father's hand as an old friend toasted to 30 years of true Southern love. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe tonight, I wouldn't just blend into the scenery. Dessert came, a sheet cake from my parents' favorite bakery, decorated with white roses and the words, 30 years, still sweet. I'd even dug up a USB of their original wedding photos and set it looping on a borrowed projector, the images casting gentle reminders of their journey. A much younger Linda in a lace dress, Paul in his only rented tuxedo, both grinning. For the first time all night, I allowed myself to smile, too. When it was time for the gifts, I cleared my throat, suddenly shy. If I could have everyone's attention, Linda pressed a hand to her mouth. Oh, my Lord, Jessica. Then, with a careless shrug, she dropped the words like a bomb. The effect was instant and devastating. Laughter and conversation died mid-sentence. My mother's face went white, eyes darting between her daughters. Dad's smile fell. Someone coughed. From the corner, a neighbor whispered, "Did she just say?" The humiliation burned down my neck, deeper than I ever could have predicted. For a full second, I thought I might faint, or cry, or beg Emily to swallow her words. But instead, perhaps because I was too tired, too drained, too old to shrink again, I didn't flinch. Still holding my glass, I raised it higher and searched the backyard for my voice. The silence was suffocating. I set my glass down and, without looking at anyone directly, especially not at Emily, who looked momentarily shocked, I picked up my purse and walked out the side gate. My heels tapped against the stones, a steady echo in the stunned quiet behind me. As soon as the fence closed, I leaned against the wood, gulping down humid night air, hands shaking. The distant laughter of neighbors, the drone of cicadas, the glow from a backyard where I no longer belonged, all tangled together. I pulled my car keys from my purse, turning them over and over in my palms, trying to steady my breathing. I thought about returning, apologizing, letting it all go, but I'd hit my limit. Years of carrying the family's weight, of funding emergencies, deferring my needs, living on scraps of affection and empty reassurances, had led to this final, sharp severance. I drove home through quiet neighborhoods, barely remembering the route, headlights blurring through the sting of unshed tears. My apartment felt cold and foreign when I opened the door. The walls, lined with photos of a family that no longer felt like mine, seemed to mock every sacrifice I'd ever made. That night, my phone didn't stop buzzing. First a text from Dad, but I couldn't. Not yet. My heart was raw and hollow, as if Emily's words had scooped out everything left inside.
Happy birthday.
For once, I did nothing to fix it. No calls came from Emily, no apology, not even the pretense of regret. It was as if I'd vanished for her as I always had. In the hours after, I wandered my tiny kitchen, making tea I never drank, sitting in the half-light, counting every past kindness that had gone unnoticed. The next morning, when the sun cut through my window, hot and relentless, I knew something in me had shifted for good. The thread tying me to my family, the thread I'd patched and repaired for years, had finally snapped. In the weeks that followed, the story of that night gained a quiet life of its own. Some friends texted in support, neighbors gossiped, and family members whispered, "That's just how Emily is." My parents called occasionally, sometimes apologetic, sometimes still making excuses for my sister, always hoping I'd come back to normal. But I knew that wasn't possible. Not anymore. For 30 years, I'd tried to buy my way out of invisibility, betting every spare dollar and every ounce of effort on the hope that one day my family would see me for who I was. On that fateful anniversary night, standing in the glow of lanterns I'd hung myself, I heard, loud and clear, that money, time, and love would never be enough for them. And as painful as that was, it was also, finally, the beginning of freedom. The first time I set boundaries. I used to believe that love, especially family love, was about doing whatever you could for the people you belonged to, even when it sometimes felt like they didn't really belong to you. My entire life, my energy had been funneled into bridging gaps no one else bothered to notice. Emotional gaps, practical gaps, financial gaps. I had been the perpetual provider, standing in the shadow of my sister's needs and my parents' expectations. In the aftermath of that disastrous anniversary night, though, something in me finally broke free. At first, the silence was a relief. I ignored the texts, let the phone ring itself, hollow, and when my mother left a voicemail, her voice tremulous, equal parts guilt and defensiveness, I stared at my phone for 10 solid minutes before deleting it unread. I spent a weekend barely speaking to anyone, wandering the farmer's market in Charlotte, buying peaches and sweet corn, sitting alone beneath a knotted oak in the city park. I was numb, but also weirdly light, as if a profound weight had finally been set down. On Sunday afternoon, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat down at my kitchen table with an empty notepad. I drew a thick line at the top, and beneath it started a list labeled, "I will not send money to pay their bills. I will not answer texts demanding immediate help. I will not tolerate being spoken down to or dismissed. I will not accept being the scapegoat for Emily's problems." Making the list made it real. Setting the intention made it feel possible. But what truly solidified my resolve was the quiet that settled in afterwards. For the first time, I allowed myself to reflect, not just on the pain, but on my own complicity. All those years, I'd let myself be defined by what I could give rather than who I was. The phone calls resumed within a few days, my mother's voice working its way from despair to annoyance to guilt and back again, as she recounted all the stress and hardship she was under. My dad called too, his tone softer but heavy, like he was carrying a load much bigger than he'd ever confess. But I stuck to my mantra, boundaries. One evening, after a long day debugging software at work, I received a group message. My mother, my father, and Emily, together. The message was almost transactional. "We know you're mad, Jess, but things are tough right now. Your sister's having trouble with rent. We just need help getting through this month." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. The old reflexes kicked in. For a second, I could feel all those years of automatic compliance, the urge to just make peace and send money. But this time, I took a breath and typed, I can't be your emergency fund anymore. This boundary is for me, not against you. I hope you understand. The aftermath was brutal. Emily blew up my phone with angry messages, calling me selfish, throwing all the years I'd never really been part of the family back in my face. Mom called 3 times in a row, leaving progressively more frantic voicemails, tearful, pleading, then outright blaming me. My dad texted something quiet. I wish things were easier for all of us. That night was awful. I barely slept, haunted by guilt and that choking sense of loss. But underneath it was a growing river of relief. Setting boundaries wasn't about punishing them. It was about saving myself. For years, I'd carried their burdens, made their emergencies my emergencies, and felt invisible anyway. Now, exhaustion had finally given way to something sturdier, self-respect. I started practicing no in small, concrete ways. When Emily messaged days later, asking if I could co-sign a lease for a new apartment, I promise it's just until I get back on my feet. I replied promptly, but firmly. You'll have to figure it out, Em. I can't do that anymore. I stopped answering every call from my mother, letting some ring to voicemail, reading her texts only when I felt strong enough not to fold. When she tried to guilt me, "We're your parents. Don't you think we deserve some help after everything we did for you?" I would answer simply, "I love you, but this is a choice I have to make for myself." At work, the change bled into other areas of my life. For once, I wasn't arriving late or tired from anxiety. My manager noticed the extra focus. My teammates commented that I seemed more relaxed. I started going for walks at lunch instead of fielding family calls. In therapy with Dr. Marilyn Lewis, I unpacked each interaction, each pang of guilt, and learned to recognize how deep my pattern of overfunctioning had run. You have the right to place limits, she said, and to be loved for who you are, not just for what you give. As the weeks turned to months, something inside me shifted irrevocably. The boundaries grew into habits. I unfollowed Emily on social media so I wouldn't see her pointed posts about abandonment and family failure. I spent time with friends who made me feel cherished for qualities my family never seemed to notice: curiosity, humor, kindness. I even joined a book club, savoring quiet evenings, discussing stories that had nothing to do with familial guilt or drama. When holidays approached, I worried the old patterns might swallow me again. But instead of offering to host or bankroll holiday meals, I RSVP'd simply, "I'll be there for dinner, but I won't be able to help with expenses this year." My mother sounded disappointed, but the world did not end. Dinner happened anyway. The more I enforced my limits, the clearer I became about what was mine to carry and what wasn't. My joy, my sense of belonging, my financial stability. These were finally in my own hands. The ache of distance from my family softened when I realized that, while I'd drawn a line, I hadn't burned a bridge. I was just choosing to cross it in my own time, on my own terms. The first time I set boundaries wasn't just a single moment. It was a series of conscious, brave acts, stitched together over days and weeks. Each no, a stitch in the fabric of my new selfhood. And with each act, I reclaimed a little more of the life I had pushed to the sidelines for so long. For the first time, I belonged wholly to myself. If anyone wanted to reach me now, it had to be on equal ground, a slow rebirth in my own city. The days after the party felt strangely suspended, like I was living in some echoing, alternate version of my old life. Charlotte's air was thick, cicadas churring under relentless summer heat, but for the first time in years, my mind was quiet. No more buzzing group chats, or back-to-back notifications from family. No more calculations on how much help to send next. I wanted to heal, but I didn't know how to begin untangling decades of obligations and old self-doubt. So I started with a simple escape, a solo weekend in Asheville, tucked away in gentle Blue Ridge Mountains, a few hours from home. I checked into a little Airbnb, just one sun-dappled room with a balcony full of wildflowers. Those few days were the first breath I'd taken just for me, in as long as I could remember. I wandered art galleries and ordered coffee, without worrying about anyone else's preference. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly, drenching the city in silver, and I lingered by the window, letting the sound quiet all the shame and resentment that had built up over years. When I went home to Charlotte, I felt unsteady but determined. Therapy seemed like the next right step, so I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Marilyn Lewis. Her office, a cozy place filled with books and gentle light, became my temporary sanctuary. I told her everything that had happened, the years of invisible giving, the humiliation at the party, the loneliness of setting boundaries. Dr. Lewis listened patiently as I poured it all out, and at the end of our first session, she asked gently, "Who gets to care for you, Jessica?" That question hung in the air. I didn't have an answer, but I wanted to find out. Over the next weeks, the rhythms of my life shifted. I poured my focus into work. My manager had recently offered me a promotion to team leader, along with a hefty $12,000 raise. I hesitated at first, afraid I'd let the old stresses weight drag me down again. But then I remembered my list of boundaries. Accepting more responsibility felt different this time. I started coming into work early, energized by new challenges, and respected for my ideas, not merely for how much I could give away. It was around then that an idea formed, something born of both my hurt and my hope. I'd never forgotten the one place I truly felt seen as a teenager, my high school's coding club, guided by a kind advisor who believed in quiet kids. Now, with some extra income and confidence, I decided to pay that forward. I drafted a plan, for the planning was exhilarating. Evenings that used to be spent fielding crisis calls from home were suddenly full of excitement. Writing lesson plans, sourcing donated laptops, encouraging shy, bright-eyed girls who reminded me so much of myself at their age. When our first session launched, watching their faces light up as they wrote their first lines of code, I felt a pride and belonging I'd chased in vain from my own family for decades. Of course, healing wasn't fast, nor was it simple. There were nights when memories of the party, or my mom's disappointed voice, or Emily's cruel sneers, crept in like unwelcome guests. But instead of spiraling, I wrote about those moments in my journal. Dr. Lewis had encouraged me to treat my wounds like old fractures that needed patience and gentle care. Bit by bit, I began to reclaim my city and my life for myself. Each Saturday, I'd visit the sprawling Charlotte Regional Farmers Market, browsing honey stalls, buying potted herbs, or sitting on a curb sipping fresh lemonade as vendors packed up. Sometimes I'd meet Helen, a college friend who'd stuck by me, for brunch at a sunny bakery in Plaza Midwood. She always made space for my stories, never pushing me to forgive or reconnect with my family, but instead reminding me that it was okay to outgrow painful roots. I started redecorating my small apartment, rearranging furniture, hanging thrifted art, filling bookshelves with novels I'd always meant to read, but never found time for. My home finally reflected me, not whoever my mother or sister thought I should be. Letting new people in was its own act of bravery. I said yes to coffee with Ethan, a friend of a coworker, sweet and quietly encouraging, who never tried to fix me. Being with him was easy. He asked about my work and my projects with she codes, but never demanded my secrets or my loyalty. One rainy evening, we walked through Freedom Park, sharing childhood stories. For the first time since the anniversary party, I laughed without hearing Emily's mocking voice in my head. Dr. Lewis noticed the change early on. "You aren't disappearing yourself anymore," she said in one session. "You're choosing what feels like home." Those words sank deeper than almost any compliment I'd ever gotten. For so long, family had meant self-erasure, carrying burdens to avoid conflict. Now, I was learning, slowly, that boundaries were a language of love, both for myself and even, in a paradoxical way, for them. I couldn't rescue my family from themselves, but by stepping back, I was offering them a chance to grow, too. It was in moments of quiet that I realized how far I'd come. Buying oranges at a corner store and chatting with the clerk about her toddler's obsession with outer space. Dancing, badly, in my living room to unwatched YouTube tutorials. Falling asleep with the window open to the hush and hum of a city full of strangers, none of whom expected anything from me except, maybe, my smile. She codes. Charlotte continued to grow. By autumn, we'd held 3 workshops, and some of the girls wrote me thank you notes. Bright purple handwriting scrawling, "Ms. Jessica, thank you for believing in me." I held those letters close. Reminders that the version of me that once felt invisible now had a legacy worth building. Sometimes my family called. My mom's number would light up my phone, and I'd pause before picking up, checking in with myself to see if I was strong enough to talk. When I did answer, I kept the boundary gentle but firm, supportive, but no longer an open wallet or emotional sponge. Dad would leave voicemails, muted and brief, sometimes apologizing, sometimes just talking about the weather. Emily stayed mostly silent, which was its own relief. What amazed me was how my world, once so cramped by guilt and duty, now felt spacious with possibility. I started to think, maybe the city could be a place for new memories, not just a backdrop to old pain. I signed up for a painting class and ran a 5K for charity. On Sunday mornings, Ethan and I would wander the neighborhoods, dreaming up stories about all the homes we passed. Charlotte became not the city of my family, but the city of my second, chosen self. Healing was a slow rebirth, private, imperfect, and ongoing. But now, each day, I was building a life defined by choice, not expectation. My own life, at last, was enough. My family faces consequences. I move forward. Fall crept quietly into Charlotte. Yellow leaves spiraled down over front lawns. The air crisp in ways that always made the world feel both new and uncertain. It had been nearly a year since the anniversary night that changed my life. After all the drama, I thought perhaps the distance between my family and me would fade. I vaguely hoped the hurt had run its course. But time, as I learned, has a way of testing every boundary and every bond. As the months rolled by, my absence began to reveal cracks in the structure of my family, ones I had unknowingly spackled over for years. Emily, once so magnetic and seemingly untouchable, lost her job at a boutique after a string of late arrivals and missed shifts. Where money once flowed freely, thanks in part to me, her finances unraveled quickly. Credit cards maxed, rent overdue, her fridge growing steadily emptier. I heard about her struggles, not through her, but whispered through old friends, a few social media posts that alternated between bravado and desperation, and from my mother's increasingly frequent phone calls. Mom's tone had changed. Gone was the dismissive confidence with which she used to brush aside my feelings or brush off my small victories. Instead, her voice pinged with anxiety, sometimes even panic. It's so tough for your sister. She'd sigh into the voicemail, always pivoting from Emily's hardships to her and Dad's own tightening finances. The family car was sold. Shopping was done at discount stores. Vacations disappeared from the calendar. The messages weren't always requests for help, but their undercurrent was unmistakable. An expectation that I would swoop in as I always had, but I stayed firm. Each time the phone rang, I paused and asked myself, is answering this in my best interest? If I was rested, strong enough, and genuinely willing, I'd listen. But I no longer offered solutions. No more, I'll help just this once. No frantic Venmo payments. No late-night research on debt consolidation or budgeting tips sent by email. My relationship with my family became more like weather. Sometimes sunny and light, sometimes heavy with the threat of storm, but always, at last, beyond my power to control. Emily's anger bubbled over several times. Once, she left a scathing comment on a photo I'd posted of a She Codes Charlotte workshop. As for Dad, he slipped into a kind of quiet resignation. We spoke rarely, sometimes about the weather, sometimes about sports scores, never about anything heavy. On his birthday, I sent a simple card instead of the usual gift card for a hardware store or restaurant. It was the tiniest of gestures, but it drew a line. I was present, but not providing. I watched from a distance as my family was forced to reckon with realities I'd buffered for years. Emily took on a roommate to split the rent. Mom picked up a part-time job at the library shelving books, a task she once would have considered beneath her. Dad, for the first time since losing his long-held job, began attending local job fairs and considering freelance consulting. There were missteps, setbacks, and plenty of blame hurled in my direction. But also, slowly, tiny glimmers of adaptation. That winter, I spent the holidays with friends, rather than family. Helen, my college friend, hosted a found family dinner that bristled with laughter, mismatched chairs, and a patchwork collection of foods everyone had brought. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw me as I was, not just for what I could do or provide, but for my quirks and stories and sense of humor. I brought my favorite sweet potato casserole, and, as I set it down, realized I wasn't anxious, wasn't worried about phone vibrations in my pocket, or hidden requests between courses. I fell into a new routine with Ethan, too. Our relationship developed not in a flurry of neediness, but in the slow confidence that comes from truly being seen. We'd spend mornings trekking through the city's leafy neighborhoods, afternoons curled up at independent bookstores, evenings on the couch with takeout and old movies. He never questioned my need for boundaries. He celebrated them. When I expressed guilt or doubt, he simply reminded me, "You're allowed to put yourself first. That's not selfish, Jess. It's healthy." Meanwhile, She Codes Charlotte continued to flourish. The girls I mentored challenged each other, downloaded coding tutorials I recommended, and sent me excited messages about the apps they'd built together. Their gratitude was straightforward and honest. One afternoon, after a busy workshop, a student pressed a thank you card into my hand. Inside, in careful handwriting, she wrote, "Thank you for believing in me. No one ever told me I was smart before." That simple affirmation echoed in me for days. It was a kind of nourishment I'd never known how much I needed. Their appreciation was never transactional. They didn't need me to sacrifice parts of myself to love them. They just wanted someone to show up and see them. By the time the first soft greens of spring began to push up in Charlotte, I understood that moving forward wasn't a one-time event. It was a process, Sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I started running in the mornings, sometimes alone, sometimes with Helen or Ethan, letting the rhythm of my feet and breath press out the noise of the past. I enrolled in a low-pressure ceramics class, my fingers caked in clay and my head blessedly empty. Of course, my family still lingered in the background. There were days when Emily's struggles tugged at my old reflexes. Sometimes Mom's voicemails made me cry or doubt the value of my choices. But now I had tools. I talked through my feelings with Dr. Lewis in therapy, wrote letters I never sent, reached out to my support network before making any decisions that risked old patterns. One sunny Saturday at the market with Ethan, a local musician strummed a cover of "Here Comes the Sun," a melody I'd heard all my life, but never truly felt belonged to me. That day, I stood in the light, groceries in hand, laughter shared, and realized, as for my family, they learned to survive too. Maybe in time, they'll learn the deeper lesson about love and limits that I was forced to reckon with. But I am no longer responsible for the pace of their growth or the tenor of their days. Recovery is neither linear nor quick. I didn't wake up one morning free of sorrow or regret, but each day spent choosing myself. Each time I honored my own boundaries without apology. The roots of my new life in Charlotte grew deeper, sturdier. Over time, I found myself not just moving forward, but thriving, open, resilient, enough. For anyone who's ever worried that saying no to family means saying no to love, my life is proof otherwise. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is giving yourself permission to step away, trusting that everyone, including yourself, is finally free to stand, learn, and grow. From turning point to inner peace. Spring in Charlotte arrived gently. Sunlight pouring through budding dogwoods, washing everything in a forgiving kind of gold. It had been well over a year since I drew the line with my family, a boundary no one had expected, least of all myself. The city felt transformed, not just by the season, but by the quiet, persistent work of rebuilding my life from the inside out. What began as a survival mechanism was blossoming, at last, into a sense of peace. Gone were the days of relentless vigilance, my phone perpetually at my side, pulse quickening at every message from home. Now, my mornings were my own, slow and soft. I developed a gentle routine, opening my little kitchen window for the first bird song, brewing coffee with local beans, tending to the potted herbs I'd coaxed back to life. I had enough room in my life, for once, to become curious about my own needs. Rest wasn't a fluke. It was a conscious practice. The boundaries I'd once created out of desperation became guardrails for a different future. I still heard from my parents and Emily, but there was space now. Sometimes days or even weeks between conversations. My mother, her tone less brittle than before, occasionally asked for advice or simply shared stories from her new part-time job at the library. My father would call about the weather or a ball game, or send a photo of something beautiful he'd seen on a walk. Emily remained more distant, her messages fewer, and often practical. No longer barbed with resentment, but not quite warm either. Each interaction was filtered through my new awareness. I could choose my level of engagement, and that freedom was nourishing. The healing wasn't linear. Every so often, a pang of regret would hit, usually when I glimpsed old family photos or heard a certain phrase in conversation. There were times when I questioned everything. Was I too rigid, too unforgiving? Did loving myself mean loving them any less? But these worries no longer had teeth. Therapy helped, but so did the evidence of my life as it was unfolding. The friendships I had deepened, the calm that had replaced a lifetime of anxiety, the sense of self-respect blossoming after years of neglect. Building peace, I discovered, was as much about creating new connections as repairing old wounds. She codes. Charlotte had found its rhythm, and with each workshop, I watched young women grow in confidence and skill. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through rented classroom blinds, a student named Astrid lingered after everyone else had gone. She fidgeted with her backpack, cheeks pink, before saying, "You make it seem okay to start over, even if nobody else gets it." I smiled, recognizing the familiar ache in her words, and realized how far I'd come from that invisible, uncertain girl, shadowed by her family. Ethan became an anchor in this season. Our relationship wasn't a cure or a hiding place. It was a partnership defined by humor, patience, and mutual vulnerability. He listened on the hard days and cheered every small victory, but never diminished what mattered to me. We'd spend weekends exploring unfamiliar corners of Charlotte, antique markets, jazz clubs, sunrise hikes along the Greenway. Sometimes we said little, content just to exist together in silence, present in ways that made the past feel both nearer and farther away. I invested in my own space, filling my apartment with evidence of a life built for myself and not for anyone's approval. Sun-catching crystals sparkled in the window. I filled the walls with prints from local artists, each one a quiet promise to celebrate beauty, even in imperfection. I tried new things just to see how they felt. Pottery classes, learning to roller skate, volunteering at a book drive, inviting friends over for potlucks where the food didn't have to be perfect and neither did I. Community, I realized, didn't have to look the way it did growing up. It could be cultivated. That found family Helen had welcomed me into, friends from the run club, even the regulars at my neighborhood coffee shop, who always greeted me with a nod and a joke. Where once I'd felt like an outsider in my own family, I now experienced belonging as a choice, something I could make for myself, wherever I was welcomed and seen. Slowly, the city that had once been a backdrop for my loneliness became an active participant in my healing. Charlotte itself grounded me. The hush of mid-morning at Freedom Park, the sweet chatter of vendors selling honey and bread at the farmer's market, the wild splash of dogwood blossoms glowing against old brick buildings. I let myself belong to this place, unhurried, letting new memories root over the old. Time brought perspective that nothing else could. I saw my family's struggle as a mirror of my own, a tangle of longing, pride, and unlearning. They were forced in my absence to navigate adult life more honestly, to reckon with each other, rather than leaning on me for a quick fix. I learned not to internalize their disappointment or their slow progress. I loved them, sometimes from a distance, sometimes in brief flickers of closeness, always with a clarity that was once unimaginable. Perhaps the greatest surprise was how peace grew, first in fragments, then in fullness. Not because old pain disappeared, but because I gave myself permission to stop carrying it. I understood, finally, that boundaries weren't walls to keep love out, but trellises to help it grow, upright and strong. The guilt faded, replaced by quiet gratitude for the lessons hard won. One warm Sunday, Ethan and I strolled the Greenway Trail as light slanted through the trees. We talked about future hopes, travel, new projects, maybe a home outside the city one day. I felt no shadows lurking, just the solid sense of now and next. Charlotte was no longer the city of my heartbreak, but the landscape of my transformation. When people ask about my family now, I offer honesty and grace, neither painting myself as a victim nor erasing the difficulties. I encourage friends who are struggling. You have a right to choose yourself. Setting boundaries isn't about rejection. It's about acceptance of the past, the messiness, the hope that we can all do better. Sometimes, when a former coding student messages out of the blue for advice or encouragement, I think of that long, invisible stretch between girlhood and now. Every act of self-advocacy ripples outward. Peace isn't a finish line. It's an ongoing act of courage, a willingness to pause and listen for what you need, and then respond, not with fear, but with compassion and resolve. I wake up each day reminded that healing is part of the work of living, and that my story, flawed and unfinished, is a good one. As Charlotte pulses toward summer once again, I look at who I've become with something like awe. I am not who I was at my family's table or in the background of someone else's celebration. I am not only what I gave away. I am the sum of every risk taken, every friendship nurtured, every gentleness I have shown myself. There is no going back to normal, only forward into the complicated, beautiful peace I have made my own.